something's going to go wrong, it's going to be now. And here we are. So welcome to my talk, Talking with Programmers 101, a guide for designers, artists, producers, and everyone else. My name is João. I come from Lisbon, Portugal, although I have been living for the past 2 years in Malmo, Sweden. I've been making games since around 2015. I worked on mobile, VR, PC, and console titles, and I've been in organizations like very small ones, doing indie games, to big AAA games. And last time I was here was at devcom 2019. I had a blast, so I'm really, really happy to be back, and I'm happy that all of you are here as well. Now, this is not a talk about how to improve soft skills. We're not here to talk about that, or at least that's not the goal. We are not here to talk about how to be more liked, or how to be more respected, or how to influence others. Sure, I will talk a lot about soft skills, but the goal of this talk is to give you tips to help you maximize productivity and product quality, and to do so by minimizing friction when talking with programmers, while boosting their motivation by giving them the necessary tools to achieve the project's needs. Now, so just before we start, how many of you here are programmers? Okay, so I hope I don't bring up like a lot of wartime memories. And the others, I assume you are not programmers? Can you raise your hand if you're not a programmer? Okay, nice. So I hope you go away at least with a good tip to help you out. Now I will present you with 3 acts over the course of this talk, each with a different scenario involving programmers and other disciplines. All of them are fiction, even though inspired by common frustration points in stories that were shared to me by programmers employed in studios of varied dimensions. So welcome to the world premiere of Code and Order, a series that explores the intricate interactions between programmers and everyone else. Now, I am a programmer as well. I am no writer, so expect this pilot episode to have a super plot with unidimensional characters, but hopefully it still gets the message across. So let's start with Act 1, One of Us. Now, this circle here is our game, and one day it broke, and it broke hard. Was it due to something big someone specific did? Or was it instead due to the sum of all the small things that everyone did? Well, nobody had answers. So the best of the thinkers and decision makers were assembled to find a way to glue the game back together. After several meetings, across several days, this team came up with the solution. Properly documented, estimated, ready to be requested. To the programmer, was not part of any discussion so far. And the team knew that their solution was brilliant, and most of all, simple, which could only mean that it would be easy to implement. How long could it take? Most probably a day. But the programmer was not buying it. Yes, the request was solid, but they could see the hidden complexity behind it. So the programmer's rough estimate was 2 weeks. Now, 2 weeks was much more than the initial estimation of 1 day. However, there was no other way. This was the solution after all. And so 2 weeks later, the programmer got to work, and 2 weeks later, the requested solution was delivered. The game was no longer broken. Right? Wrong. It turns out that the requested solution did not solve the main issue, at least not all of it. But it is fine, because this committee of decision makers, they came up with an updated request, which for sure will restore the circular integrity of the game. And the programmer can just get to work on it. The issue is that the programmer still does not understand exactly what they are fixing. They know that the game is broken, but they do not know why or how. Which brings us to our tip number 1. Present the problem, not the solution. Now, the obvious solution is not always the best one. Let's say you need to open a padlock. You obviously need a key for the job, right? Well, Technically, yes. But for sure there are other ways, like using a bolt cutter or picking the lock with a paper clip. And maybe they are not the correct tools, but maybe they are the tools you have. So by presenting the issue instead, you give the programmer space to come up with the best solution. And by best solution, I mean one that answers the questions that were raised by the problem in the cheapest, most robust, and most efficient way, while still accommodating the different disciplines' desires. If you already have a bolt cutter, it's probably better and more efficient to use it than to having to forge a key. And even if all you are looking for is to make a small change, there is no direct complexity correlation between a conceptual and an architectural change. And maybe your small change, like just making a key appear in your mind that would open a padlock, is not that small after all, because you still actually need to make the key. But there's something you can do to make sure that you always present the problem and not the solution, which is our tip number 2. Involve programmers in early definition. You should have programmers sit in definition meetings as soon as possible, as this ensures that potential problems due to technical limitations are taken into account on the definition of the feature or project you want to do. By adding a buffer between where the definition occurs and who has to make that definition a reality, in this case, a programmer, you are making vital information harder or impossible to get. Think of it as the broken phone problem. The information the programmer gets will never have the same quality as if it had been given to them firsthand. Also, how many more meetings can you fit in your calendar? Because to be able to pass this information to the programmer, this means at least one meeting more. And above all, the more your programmer understands the intent of what you are trying to do and how it fits into the big picture, the better they will be able to help you out. A common complaint among programmers is that they often feel impactful decisions are being made elsewhere, and that they wish they could be more times part of the discussion and have the chance to express concerns before final decisions are made. And I say final, we're going to talk about it in a bit. So in this case, where person A has a request, discusses with person B, and person B goes to a programmer, we have at least 2 meetings in the best case scenario. Now the issue is when the programmer has a concern or reservation about the request. And this means that they will communicate it to person B goes to person A, which goes to the programmer, and this can start a loop. So what I propose instead is what we can now see on the right side, that person A, person B, and the programmer sit down together, understand the problem together, and arrive to what needs to be done. This can maybe, well, you're going to have at least like 50% less of meetings, because you go from 2 to 1, but hopefully you can actually just have it in one meeting. And these meetings, there is another benefit to this, which, because when you involve the programmers early, you give them the chance to listen to how you think, which is our tip number 3, loop programmers into your logic. Now, as an example, we have an animator here who is thinking about how to fix some animation flow. And they suggest that the animation is broken down into 3 parts, with the last one being swapped out according to context. Now, when this animator thinks out loud, they are not just expressing a need. They are also showcasing their thought process, essentially how their brain works. And just from hearing the animator, the programmer more or less understands what the problem is and what needs to be done, even before the request is properly formulated. Programmers are usually very good at reading between the lines. Since this is a lot of what we do for work, for instance, when we are debugging the games. We need to listen to the game and try to read beyond what it is telling us on the screen. So in situations like this, programmers will be able to identify a solution that answers the need, but also adapts to the form of who needs to use it. In other words, this is an excellent way to get programmers to not only understand what you need, but also how you want it. So they can provide you solutions that cater to your preferred way of working. Another good thing you can do is to make sure that everyone has a base understanding of the topic. So tip number 4 is set a common language. Now, by involving programmers and other disciplines early on, the needs to explicitly set a common language become lower as you are creating this language together. However, there are still things you can do. You can set up a lexicon for the feature to reduce communication friction, as this helps code come up with proper naming for classes, variables, and all that, so that it does not break away from the naming that everyone else is using. This happened to me already, and it happens a lot to programmers that there's people discussing a feature and you don't know what it is, and it turns out it is exactly the one that you coded. It's just using completely different names. So a lexicon is really good for that. And on top of feature-specific things, you should also feel free to include the discipline-specific concepts, because even if they are obvious for you, they might not be obvious for others. So things like user story, animation trigger, or what a texture is. The lexicon is an immensely valuable piece of information, especially for any new joiner to the project, or for other teams that may need to use the feature in the future, or that they need to inherit what you did. And all we discussed so far are active steps to break down silos, our tip number 5. Now, silos are bad. They can contribute for an us versus them environment. They are great increasers of communication friction, and they actively reduce team spirit. Programmers, designers, producers, artists, animators, sound designers, etc., etc. In the end, we are all the same, game developers. And we all want the same, to deliver the best game we can deliver and possibly leave our mark in the industry, impacting as many players as we can. Together, we are more than the sum of our parts, and we need to leverage on that at all times. So let's move on to our second act, the request. So there is a need to add the most excellent character to the game, which in this universe is somehow a code-only task. And the programmer does not know much about the character, but they certainly know what excellent means. So they promptly accept the challenge and they get to work. And they develop the most mesmerizing character, at least in their minds, just according to what was requested, the most excellent character. However, the requester really wishes this character had a beard, which is a problematic request. And can you see the issue with adding a beard here? In this universe, programmers are also sculptors, so just go along with it. So our character here is made of hard marble stone, and you can only subtract from it. You cannot add. So, yeah, well, I guess the programmer gets to work again, and they need to redo the statue from zero. But it was faster this time, because they have previously acquired knowledge. And I guess the result still looks like the most excellent character, but with a beard. But the requester now wants a hat. And the programmer will have to redo everything once more. But thankfully, the requester ensures this is the last change, which somewhat eases the programmer's internal pain. One less redo, it will be even faster than the previous one. But it is never the last change. And so the requester and the programmer get stuck in this loop till they land in what the requester had in mind from the beginning. Which turns out it was not the most excellent marble statue, but the most excellent plastic figure with easy to swap out parts. Which brings us to tip number 6, be specific. Programmers are often presented with final designs that end up changing with time. This is fine and expected. Game development is an iterative process after all, but accommodating changes to code that was written as final can be hard, and usually harder than just changing the design itself or the intent. And so if you cannot be specific, you should point it out. Say that your character has no beard by default, but that maybe this can change. This makes the programmer code things in a way that is easy to add that functionality later, or even to make it from the get-go that you can turn a beard on and off. Because due to time or scope constraints, programmers need to pick which features need modular solutions, and without knowing the need is there, whatever estimate provided to production will be wrong. I can say that it takes me 1 day to make Michelangelo's David, but if we go on this feedback loop forever, maybe it's going to take 2 weeks. So to reduce repeated requests of the same type, it is important to promote generic solutions. Our tip number 7. Now, programmers are often lazy. Lazy doesn't mean they don't like to work. This means that they want to be like very specific on the changes they made to code. And they don't want to make something that is too big if there's no need for it. So they will not build an entire generic system unless there's a clear reason. And this reason can be explicit, for instance, as part of the request, for instance, requesting right away that our character needs to have modular parts, or it can be implicit and informed by the present needs. If for whatever reason there is no established design for something, agglomerating similar requests or hinting that there will be a need for something similar in the future can generally inform the programmer on what solution to develop. For instance, if we have a lot of requests to add animation triggers, maybe the programmer will just right away go and create a system so that anyone can add animation triggers without the need for programmer's time. And especially for producers, you may have a better overview of existing tasks in the backlog, and you can actively agglomerate them and take a guess that, well, maybe this is the same thing. Additionally, you are the one who needs to give the programmer space so that the generic solution can be developed. Even if it's going to push a milestone 1 or 2 days, maybe it's going to reduce the total development time by some weeks. Tip number 8, be persistent. Programmers will push back on your requests. It's part of our job to do so. But do not be afraid when we do it. Like with the iteration loop not being as fast as in other disciplines, programmers are natural resistant to changes to existing solutions. Especially because I can guarantee you that all programmers in this room and everywhere in the world passed by situations like that. So sometimes it feels a bit like we need to be the ones ruining the party. Everyone is excited about something. Let's put it in, and the other one's like, oh, hold your horses. Like, let's actually think about this. But we need to do it. And even more when changes are not fully explained. So what you need to do is that you need to get programmers on your side. And you do that by showing that your request is valid, why it improves the game, and what are the odds that things might change. Make them work with you and not for you. We now reach our final act, true colors. So our requester on the left has a clear goal for a feature they want to achieve. They take their time to explain it to the programmer on the right, and then request for a delivery estimate. Now, the programmer understood the vision, but has some concerns about it. Unfortunately, this specific programmer talks about things at a very low level, meaning that for the requester, they sound more or less like this. And the programmer goes on about data, quantum systems, complicated algorithms, other tech terms about like how to land on Mars that nobody understands, and especially the requester barely understands anything. So all that the requester heard was gibberish, and none of it is about the information they wanted. What is the delivery estimate? So they just dismiss it entirely, and they request the delivery date again. Now this obviously frustrates the programmer, who feels like they were not listened to. But either way, they get to work and deliver exactly what was requested. Now sometime later, the requester and the programmer bump into each other. And the requester informs the programmer that actually the feature they had previously spoken about had too many issues and broke things elsewhere, So ultimately, it was decided to be cut entirely. Well, no wonder, commented the programmer, clearly not surprised. They had anticipated all the issues, they tried to communicate them, but no one listened. But it's fine. There's a lot of programming tasks in the backlog. So the programmer will be entertained and motivated. After all the programmers love to code. Except this one, maybe. So tip number 9 is listen. Every good conversation starts with listening. Do not shut down technical conversation. This is like, never do it. Because usually programmers are trying to provide better visibility of their work or of the underlying system. Their goal is to give you a better understanding of how something functions and why that impacts the feasibility of what you want to achieve. Talking as experts, programmers may not always realize that some information is not general knowledge outside of the programming bubble, which is where we spend most of our time. And besides that, it can sometimes take a while to reformat our way of thinking and expressing ideas. A bit like what happens when you switch the language that you're speaking and the first words that come out of your mouth are much harder to speak than the ones that come after. And on top of that, less experienced programmers may lack the skills to translate the information into layman's terms. It's an important skill, it's something essential to our job, but it's something that we learn with time. It's not like we have a subject at university or anywhere else about how to express technical ideas in some other way. And if you actively listen to someone, you increase the chances that someone will actively listen to you in the future. Now, listening is not the same as hearing. It is an active process, requires focus and ongoing repackaging of absorbed information. So of course, to be able to repackage this information, you need to understand it. And that's why you should ask for a less technical explanation. It is totally fine if you do not understand everything a programmer says. And I'm gonna let you in on a secret, we also don't understand everything you say. Because in the end, we all have different responsibilities and thus different knowledge in different areas. Programmers will not think less of you for seeking to understand more. Programmers are knowledge seekers. We are constantly trying to understand how something works better. We are constantly trying to make it work better as well. So by showcasing something that we appreciate, for sure that people will not think less of you. So it is great if you can ask for things to be presented in an alternative way, which not only helps you understand the problem that is being talked about in the moment, but will also ease future conversations, because the programmer will understand what you know, what you don't know, how you prefer information to be presented. And please, 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 never say you understand unless you do, because programmers will usually not ask twice. Maybe the nice ones will, but we usually take information as universal truth. I think like one of the pains that programmers sometimes have, like with things changing a lot, is that we spend most of our time talking with computers, and computers never lie. Yes, sometimes we don't understand them, sometimes they do things we don't want, but it's because we made them do things we don't want them to do. So if you say you understand, programmers will say, cool, let's move on. It's a little bit like whenever I see these memes, I always say, oh, these people are programmers. Like they just read it like very literally and act on it that way. Now, tip number 11, trust your programmer. Programmers own the technical side of a system, so sometimes you need to have blind faith in the concerns that they raise, even if you not fully understand them. Don't trust them when they say something is impossible, but trust them when they say something is very hard or complex. Because even though everything is possible and the sky is the limit, it might not be true in the current context, either for scope, complexity, or timeline reasons. So this means that you need to be open to compromise on limitations. Sometimes the difference between going from a good enough solution to an excellent one can mean a huge development cycle, a great increase in the development cycle, and many times this missing functionality is something the game and you can live without. Tip number 12, respect their work. Now, for now, most programmers are not ChatGPT, which means that requests should be meaningful so that meaningful work can be produced. You cannot just like be asking all the time, oh, let's see what ChatGPT answers, but with a real life programmer. Because programmers value their work in terms of quality and purpose. Meaning that even if something is stellar from a tech point of view, it is ultimately meaningless if it serves no purpose. It is as if code exists only when it compiles and runs. So what this all means in the end is that if you treat code as disposable or easily changeable, you will be constantly breaking the purpose of their work. And eventually, the programmer will start thinking the same way as you, lose respect for the outcome of their own work, and they will deliver with less and less quality. As I have observed many times, an unmotivated programmer eventually breaks or lives, and that is usually a cog in the machine you cannot afford to lose. Now, tip number 13. Well, this tip could just be do not assume anything about anyone or anything, but let's go a bit more specific and do not assume programmers love to code. Many do, and that is great, that's like excellent. But a lot are just using code as a tool for game making, which like I'm culprit of that. And when I started out my career as a programmer, I did not start in games, I just started in like some random consultancy company, and I was supposed to be allocated to clients to help them out with things, and I was always being asked, what is your motivation? And the way I was being asked is, are you more motivated with programming with C++? Are you more motivated in doing front end with AngularJS? And for me, I never quite understood the question, because my answer was always the same. Like I'm motivated by the project. The tools are not that important. Put me somewhere I can make games, and I don't need to program if I'm not needed to do that. And I always felt that this was a handicap somehow. I felt that, well, true programmers, they go wild whenever there is a new C++ standard that comes out, and I don't have that motivation, and I thought that this was an issue. But I understood that's actually not the case, and I work with a lot of programmers that love to code, and a lot of programmers that love to code more or less, and a lot of programmers that don't like it at all. But because there's more to programming than coding, most of it is problem solving and making things work. So in that sense, the way I feel is not rare at all. And it's also not rare at all that someone is motivated by the tech they get to use. For instance, I have a friend of mine that recently said he is working in a project, and the project is not so good, but they are working with a lot of emerging technology, and that is super cool because no other game on the market is using it, so they are very motivated for that. And what this means as well is that this motivation can change with time and can change with project. And so in the end, this means that each programmer is a different programmer. And this is my final tip, and I hope that even if you forget everything else, I hope this is the tip that you remember. For example, you can ask a programmer if a feature makes sense to them. And some programmers are the happiest with only handling implementation, fully trusting you to come up with what needs to be done. While others like to share their views on how the proposed changes might affect the player experience, how the changes may clash with an existing system, and how an alternative solution might be a better option. Others still are seeking to be more deeply involved in the decision and definition process so they can better achieve their full potential and provide the best solution for the feature. And I'm sure that if you keep asking the same question, you will get different answers. And hopefully, this diversity on ways of thinking only keeps expanding, as we still have ways to go to achieve proper diversity in the programming space, with only about 2 programmers in every 10 identifying as women, with similar statistics showing there is not enough ethnic representation. So try to break preconceptions you might have about what a programmer is and what motivates a programmer. Think instead about when and where, during the course of the development of a feature or a game, would the programmer's best technical expertise be of best use. For instance, If a programmer is very strong technically, they might enjoy optimization tasks, which are very important when wrapping up development. On the other hand, if a programmer is very creative and has an eye for design, they might be best suited for a pre-production phase where there's more space for experimentation. You will encounter programmers at different levels of communication skills and with different sensibilities. For some, you will need to employ all of the tips that you got from this talk. For others, just a few of them, and for a very rare few, maybe none at all. It is important to adapt the form of your message to the programmer who is in front of you. And parallel to your efforts, programmers also need to improve a lot and try to be better communicators. After all, it takes two to tango. But that is a subject for the next episode. Thank you.
All right, can you hear me? Perfect. First of all, thank you so much for the talk.
Thank you.
It
Thank you
was
for having me.
Very good. Now we're gonna start the Q&A section. So if any one of you have any questions, perfect.
That's,
Okay.
Hi there, great talk. Do you have any insights specifically about how to ease the communication between your lead dev and your CEO or project manager? I find that a lot of times I can get the art director, I'm the game designer, the level designers to talk to the programmers and reach some kind of shared language, but every single time my lead dev and my CEO are sitting in the room, it goes off the rails really quickly. So
okay. Yeah. So I don't know if you have like specific for the lead dev, but when you say like it goes off the rails, it's more that like they are trying to be protective, or it's you think that.
Everything you mentioned happens.
Okay.
The
Okay.
programmer will give a really technical answer.
Yeah.
She wants to know, she cares about timelines, she cares about budgets, she cares about project status. All right? He's trying to communicate that the question was not possibly phrased properly or that there are other elements to be considered.
Yeah.
She doesn't care. Right?
Yeah. No.
Everything you described, that microcosm happens.
Yeah.
All right? And then I'm there with a fire extinguisher.
Yeah, no. So I think the thing is like, and it's the second part or second episode is about like, as well as how programmers adapt to others, and I think there's a lot of very informative talks about that, and I think there was not a lot about the talks about the other side. So I think that's why I chose this topic. Yeah, also, by the way, like just if you need a reminder. So I think the thing there is, like in the last scenario that I showed, we have this. In this scenario, yes, sure that like all the concerns are dismissed, but the first person who is at fault there is the programmer, because they are not being able to convey the information well. So I think the only thing you can do there is like stand your ground and just say, explain it in another way, explain it in another way. Like eventually it will click, and it will click for both sides, because there needs to be. It's not that there is programming language and that there is a production language and people need to flip. It's more you need to find something in the middle. I can give an example, like so I'm Portuguese, my girlfriend is Polish, and we speak English with each other, but I'm sure that the English that we speak together is not good English. We just found like something in the middle that kind of works. So I guess in the end it's that there needs to be a collective effort to get there, but there also needs to be this idea that we are in it all together, right? Like we want the same thing. So when a producer comes to you and says, "Can you fit this in your sprint?" You cannot go like, "Oh, don't talk to me. I don't want that. Like you are trying to break my sprint." No, that's not the goal, right? Even if it could have been better formulated, there's something there that needs to be addressed. So I think the first thing you can do is always like breathe. Because I think it's the first step, and then after that, like go like slowly and say what exactly do you want, and try to make the whole conversation about how are we gonna make this game together, and less how are we gonna accommodate your request, because your request is a game need, right? And we are all trying to do the same.
Thank you. Any more questions? Perfect. Here we have one.
You hear me?
I can hear you, like if you just speak, yeah.
Yeah, but you hear me like okay,
Yeah, yeah.
perfect. Thank you so much for that great talk. It really
Thank you.
affects like because I work with programmers only. I'm a technical producer. I have 25 programmers, and how we solve the issue involving programmers by having the tech lead attending the meetings and have the technical decisions. But to your last point, each programmer is different. Sometimes the technical lead have really good technical skills, but we have some senior people in the team are like worried about tech debt, or this adding this feature will increase tech debt or performance or unit testing, because when you go to Swarm, which is review,
Yeah, yeah.
it's more intense than Oppenheimer the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I cannot include my entire programmers there because like we're talking about like 10 sometimes in a team. And in the last slide you show that they are different, so they have different motivation. So does that mean that I need to include more programmers? They have so they cover all the aspects. If that's the answer, how can I get there? Do I need to have a workshop to understand their motivation, or it's like during one-to-one with them? Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I would say like if you have one-to-one with your programmers, I would say that's probably the best time to understand it, to understand exactly what motivates them and where they want to be. Because one thing that I say is involve programmers as early as possible. I don't say involve programmers in the first meeting. Like maybe that's not where programmers should be. But maybe you have one programmer that actually could handle that and should be there. Maybe you have programmers that shouldn't be in any meeting. It's cool. It's cool that everyone is at the level where they can be from the first meeting and to be like in the definition. But that's not how it is for all the programmers. So it is hard because then you need to define a process, right? And so you define a process and you define, well, programmers are not involved at all because we had these 3 programmers and they are just bringing up technical stuff. We don't understand them, so they're not going to sit with us. But from that, you can be cutting like programmers who would actually like be constructive in a meeting like that. So there is no easy answer. I think it's programmers need to convey the needs for you. They need to convey their motivation, but you also need to be able to read them and to be able to understand. Well, this person should be here. This like what they're gonna say is gonna impact what we're gonna do here. So yeah, so unfortunately there's not like one answer that answers everything, but yeah.
Yeah, but really thank you so much. There was a really eye-opener because using the tech leads as the go-to solution always, it works to some degree, but not always. But that means that sometimes I need to involve different programmer early in the stage.
Yeah.
And the tech lead after or something. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. But also like picking up on a tech lead, I think that even if you have this process, let's say a director talks with the tech lead directly, and this is the only time they do it, it's good if the tech lead can go and say, yes, but I'm sure that the person who's going to be developing that is this person, so come. And the other thing that, not specifically with programmers, but that I had a lot, like in a studio I worked like previously, is that people would just sit at meetings. For instance, like programmers are talking about something, and the producer would come, but not say anything, just that they understand the issues. And they will say, I'm not here, I'm not going to be talking, I'm not going to say you cannot do this, I just want to understand. And I think that's fine.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, there we have another question.
Hi, that was brilliant, by the way.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, yeah, I'm far, sorry. Hi, I was saying like that was brilliant, by the way. I have a question that might be a bit too subjective. So I'm a designer and I work closely with programmers as well. But I do sense that when I'm at like a proof of concept / prototyping stage, when I'm like associated with just one programmer, it is hard to be pretty specific because we're prototyping and that's my stage where I'm proofing things for myself. And why I'm saying it might be subjective, and I would love to hear your thought on it, because I've had programmers in my experience where they get pretty sad or frustrated if I come up with changes. And I always joke that, I have to at first like entertain them, make them happy, and then say, hey, but I need this.
Yeah.
So how would you say to be specific at such an early stage?
Yeah, so I think it's also about being specific that things are not specific. So it's all about setting expectations. Because if you go like this, we are making a game. Oh, look at this brilliant idea you had. I do it and you cut it, like next day. That's not fine. Like, it's not fine for me because I did not understand what we were doing. I thought we were gonna make that. But if you go and say, this is an experimentation phase, we're gonna do a lot of stuff. And some will stick, some will not. And we're just gonna be trying with it. And actually make this system configurable. Let's try it like, and it doesn't need to be something complex. It can be as easy as this. I need a button. And then you go next day and say, can we make it red? So, oh, I didn't program the ability to change colors. And you can just go and say, I want a button and I want to be able to set the color. And this is specific. It's not the color that is specific, but the ability to do it. But in the end, I think it's more about expectations. It's more about, it has happened to me, and I think happened to a lot of programmers, that many times, like, especially like production comes and say, we need to do this now, this is super important. You do it, you kill yourself to do it, and then it's cut. Oh, because there was no time after all. It's like, yeah, why couldn't this be something that you told me beforehand, so that maybe I would have cut corners in some bits? So it's more about that than exactly being specific on the design. Yeah.
Perfect. Do we have any more questions? In the back there.
So coming from the, can you hear me? Hi.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, thank you for the great talk. Coming from the programmer's perspective, do you have any resources or tips for the programmers how to learn to communicate better?
Yeah, so I'm actually gonna recommend a talk from a colleague of mine. His name is Scott Lagrasta. I don't fully remember the name of the talk, but I think it's something like how to be a beloved programmer. And Scott is a programmer on my team right now, but he was actually, I think, a senior game designer at BioShock. So he did like the whole game design flow, and then he switched to programming. So he really understands that part. And a lot of it is not just about how to talk, but also like how do you make documentation? How do you write like meaningful comments and all that? So I think that's a really good talk. And there's another one from GDC 2016 or 2013, I don't remember, which I don't fully remember the name, but so I'm gonna botch it. But it's like something like designers are from Venus, programmers are from Uranus or something like this. And yeah, and that thing, it's more about design and programming, but it really touches also a little bit of things that I touched on my talk on how the disciplines are different and where the frustration points come from many of the time. So I think a lot to solve all the issues is understanding. Like, understand that when a game designer comes to you and they want to change something, they are not exactly trying to like break your work, and they're not trying to make it hard for you to do it. They just want something which for them is simple, and they don't know how your system works, so that's fine. So yeah, so those two talks I recommend for sure. Yeah, I can give you the links better after if you want.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Any more questions? No? We have still a few minutes, but okay. I have one small question though, because I felt very identified as you mentioned that they always assume that programmers love to code.
Yeah.
And in my teams there was always this assumption, and for me I like to code, else I wouldn't be a programmer, but how can I communicate it back to the team, like ways to find some ways that don't, because they always give tasks with programming and codes and stuff, but how could you communicate it back to the team?
Yeah, so I think it's a subtle thing, and well, you can be very explicit about it. You can just go and, well, I don't know if it's very clever to just go in a studio and say, you know, I don't love to code. It's like I just hired you, but I think if you are subtle about it, more in like, these are the kind of tasks that motivate me, and maybe those tasks are more based on game design and not so much on like on hard programming, or also in the way that you react to the tasks that you get. So if you have a lot of concerns, for instance, about game design, about player experience, player feel, I think game designers pick up on that eventually, and they said, okay, this is the person I go to whenever I want to change something. I don't know exactly how I want to change. I just know that what I have now is not what I want. I don't know exactly how to change it, but maybe I go to this person. This person will do. It's more about experimenting than the other part. But it also depends on what kind of programmer you are, like in your structure. If you're gonna be a gameplay programmer, there will be a lot of like hard math sometimes, but you're not maybe not gonna be touching graphical stuff, which maybe can be hard, or physics. If you love that, maybe you're gonna be an engine programmer. So it's also about where you are, and the tasks that arrive to you kind of depend on the specific job you have.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Anyone else with questions? No? Perfect. Okay, then
Yeah.
first of all, thank you so much for the talk. It was amazing. Can't
you.
wait to have you back with the next chapters.
Yeah.
So
Great,
perfect.
thank you very
Give it
much.
up for Joe.
Thank you.